All right, welcome back to the Colin Doyle YouTube channel. I am Colin Doyle, not the Colin Doyle, but a Colin Doyle, who is a lifelong lacrosse fan, here with the first real video on the channel. And since the playoffs have just wrapped up and the Buffalo Bandits have been crowned the champions in a three-game series, that got me thinking. Three-game series, when did we start that in the NLL? Because it wasn't always like that. And it got me thinking about the different formats that the playoffs have taken over the years that even I've been watching, let alone well before that. So I went and did a little bit of digging around to find out what the playoff formats in the NLL have been like. So we are going to do a full comprehensive history of the playoff formats in the NLL. If you like this video, like the video. If you like the content as a whole, subscribe for more NLL content, news, updates, and also history videos like this one coming out hopefully weekly for a little while. But without further ado, let's get into the video. Here is our paint document, because that's what I'm going to be using for the next little while until I figure out some alternate method of doing this, but it'll do for now. And yeah, these are all the different playoff formats. If you want to read ahead a little bit, I'm realizing now that all of my points are on a slant, which is that's bugging me a little bit now, but doesn't matter. Let's get right into things. So the league started off in 1987 as the Eagle Pro Box Lacrosse League, and this was the first and only time that every team in the league made the playoffs. All four of four teams did make it in. It was a single elimination playoff all the way through for both the 87 and 88 seasons, before they decided to rebrand in 89 to the MILL, Major Indoor Lacrosse League, to kind of get a little bit more familiar with the public as the Eagle Pro Box Lacrosse League. While really good and inspired by Indigenous culture, people weren't really getting it, if you will. So they changed it to the Major Indoor Lacrosse League because that's exactly what it is. And in this year, they had a three-team playoff, going from 100% to 50% of the teams making it in. The one seed in the entire league would get a bye to the finals, and the second and third seeds would play in the playoffs. It was like that for 89 and 90. Before 91, the league split into two different divisions for the first time, and the winner of each division went straight to the finals. So there were only two playoff teams in 91. And the league went, that's weird. These aren't playoffs. That's just the finals. So then they made it to playoffs again in 92 when they added an extra team to the league to make it a total of 7. So 6 teams here would make the playoffs, which is a lot out of 7. Pittsburgh would be the unfortunate team to miss out. The Bulls not having very much luck there, and they didn't really in their entire career in the league. But in 92, there were 6 out of the 7 teams. There are still 2 divisions in the league as well. In 94, a team dropped out, went back to 4 teams in another single elimination format. And this would be the first time in the league since the EPBLL days that there were no byes and no teams going directly to the finals. So a bit of a shift there in the way that things worked. And in 95, they would collapse back into a single division right after, going from 4 teams to 4 teams. But the seeding worked a little bit differently because it was 1 through 4 instead of the East and then the West and then the finals. Thought I would throw in here the Cobra catastrophe in 96. I want to make a whole video on the Charlotte Cobras, which in my opinion are the worst franchise in North American sports history, professional North American sports history, as they were a team that played 1 season in the entire league, went 0-10, so they didn't get a win, marking the only winless season in the league's history, and then folded immediately right after. So they're the only franchise, I think, in any major sport in North America at the professional top level to never get a win as a franchise. Although that's just wild in 10 games to not get a single win. So I definitely want to do a deep dive on both the history of the Charlotte Cobras in that crazy year, as well as if they are actually, in fact, the worst team in professional sports in North America. It would stay at 4 teams for a little while before in '02 they would expand another 4 teams from the 9 that they had at that point up to 13. And they're like, nah, 4 teams seems a little low. So they bumped it up to 6 teams and was like, nah, one division, that seems a little low. Why don't we go to 3? So they had 3 divisions for some reason in this year, with the first seed in each division getting an automatic bid into the playoffs. And I think the next 3 were all wild card style, because in '03 there were 3 teams from the North Division and only 1 from the East, which was very odd, but nonetheless, 6 teams in this one, and the top 2 teams in the league would get the byes. That would be Toronto and Albany. So Washington, despite being the first seed out of the East Division, would still have to play in the first round and went up against the Philadelphia Wings. They ended up beating them, but Toronto and Albany would meet in that finals where Toronto would take them down. A little plug of my team there for just a second. But after that, in '04, the league would end up going down to just 10 teams, and they would collapse back into 2 divisions, 6 in the West and then 4 in the East. Continuing on with the 6-team playoffs. After the '02 expansion of the playoffs to 6 teams, we would never see it drop below 6 teams again, and probably won't ever again, considering how many teams are in the league now. Spoiler alert, it's at an all-time high at 15, but I don't think it'll ever drop below 6 again unless the league absolutely collapses into catastrophe somehow. In '06, then, they decided to expand to the largest playoffs that we have ever seen and probably will ever see unless the league absolutely booms and we end up going to 12 at some point, when I would say around 18 to 20 teams are in the league, but that is a long way out since we're at 15 right now. But this 18 playoff format would be the longest playoffs that we would ever see. A single elim all the way through still, which is very interesting considering that there's a lot more teams and also more games being played. I think at this point it was up to at least 12 games in a season, if not 14 at this point. I think it was still at 12 though, in that season in '06. And they would stay at 8 teams for a long time, although there was a lot of turnover in the franchises that were actually in the league from the turn of the century to the 2010 season and a little bit on from that, as we would stabilize around 9 teams in that 2012-ish season. And that would be the largest percentage of teams that would ever make the playoffs since the EPBLL days. 8 of the 9 teams in the league, which is an astounding almost 89% of teams in the league would make the playoffs, which is wild why they didn't go back down to 6 earlier. And they realized after 2 years, hey, this is kind of a bad idea. So then they did go back down to 14 in 2014, or excuse me, they went back down to 6 in 2014. I can read properly. But they also introduced some very weird things here too. One good thing that they introduced was the finals being a best of 3-ish series. And in 2014, that would be the first time that we would see an expansion into a series that's larger than 1 game in the NLL. And the finals would never go back down to 1 game after this to this day. And really, the playoffs at this point are only expanding even more. So that's definitely a good thing in terms of games in a series. But the weird thing that they did in 2014 was like, you know what would be fun? Is if we had 2 games and then this gimmicky little mini game at the end of the second game where it's actually game 3, but it's literally only 10 minutes long. And everybody was like, okay, well, let's see how that works. And then we got a mini game in literally every series in that playoffs, including the finals, which was weird that the entire finals was decided on a 10-minute mini game. Although Rochester did still end up winning regardless because they're insane and won all of 2012 through 2014. So the minigame actually was kind of cool to watch because it was very fast-paced and everything mattered a lot in the minigames. So, you know, while it's gimmicky, it was kind of cool. But at the same time also doesn't feel like true playoff lacrosse. So I don't know. Leave your comments down below on your opinion on the minigame and how it felt in the few seasons that it was there, from 2014 to 2017. But one little interesting thing of note about the minigames was that in 2015, because of a scheduling conflict with the Rush's home field, they had to give up their home field advantage. Because if you think about it, because the mini game is played directly after game two, which is also a very weird part. It was played on the same night as game two. Then technically game two and game three, if they were played at home, would give the team the advantage. So game one was always played with the lower seeded team being the home team, and the higher seeded team would get game two as their home field advantage, because then even if they did make the comeback, they would get game three, the mini game, at home as well. But because of that scheduling conflict that happened with the Rush, they had to take home field advantage away. They had to give it to the Calgary Roughnecks. So the Rush got game one at home, but Calgary ended up getting game two in the mini game in Calgary. And while Calgary won the main game, Edmonton did still end up winning the mini game and went on to win the finals as well. So that is very interesting. And in 2015 as well, because we saw a mini game in the finals in 2014, they immediately reverted it to be a actual best of three in the finals, which wasn't necessary. The Rush absolutely smoked the Rock that year, regardless, in two games, and ended up winning it at home. So wonderful. But that was rectified very quickly into a full best of three. So I think this is the only time in NLL history, in this little brief stretch here from 15 to 17, that we've had three different formats for all three rounds. We had a one-game series in the first round. We had the 2+1, which is the two in the mini game, for the semifinals, and a best of three in the actual finals, which is just so complicated and hard to wrap your head around, but also so much fun if you got mini games, which I don't know if we did very often in this stretch. I think we may have gotten one or two mini games the entire time after that 2014 season, where there were three. So that was also very interesting. A very interesting time in the playoffs. But in 2018, they were like, okay, you know what? We're just going to get rid of the mini games, and went with best of three in the finals and single elim for everything else. And they finally got rid of the mini games. 6 of 9 teams still made it in, and after this is when they started to think about expansion again. And in 2019, they did get the expansion that they wanted, and in this year, they went back up to 8 teams for the first time since 2013, with more than 9 teams in the league, thank goodness. And this became single elim until finals as well in this year, and it would stay like that for the next 2 seasons because there were no playoffs in those 2 seasons. The 2020 season was cut short after anywhere from, I believe, 8 to 11 games were played by each team because of the world stopping because of the COVID pandemic. And in 2021, because of the same pandemic, there was no season at all. It was canceled entirely, and we finally came back in 2022 with a fully revamped playoff system that we still have today, where the semifinals went from 1 game to 3. A minor change, but one that is big, especially with the league expanding. It gives some more weight and allows for a couple more playoff home games to be played for all the teams as well, which is always nice to see. Although the first round is still a single game elimination, so definitely one of the most stressful times in the playoffs, especially if you're a Rock fan and you have to play the Thunderbirds every year, it seems. But still, a good format, in my opinion, that we have now with the 1-3-3, and it feels like all of them have weight in a way, and things really get started in that second round, where it feels like the first round is almost sort of a wild card kind of state, and it puts a lot of weight on those games, and I really like that about the current system that we have. And with that, it's funny that the current system that we have with the 1-3-3 format, the only teams that have ever made it through to the finals in that is Colorado from the West and Buffalo from the East, and they've split the finals 1-1 in those series, Colorado winning last year and Buffalo getting their turn this year. We'll see if somebody else is finally going to make it in, especially with the expansion. Desert Dogs, Panther City starting to look good. The Seals were great this year. Couldn't get it done in the first round, though, although it was Colorado and they had a rough start without Ryan Lee, but when he came back, he was nuts, as usual, because it's Ryan Lee. We'll see if this playoff format is going to evolve in the future. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't think it will until we get 18 to 20 teams, at which point we may see it expand to 12 with like an actual sort of wild card kind of state coming in. Although I feel like expanding the playoffs at this point without the season expanding as well to like 20 or 22 games doesn't quite feel right at the moment. So we will see what happens with that. But I hope you enjoyed this video. It was fun doing the research for this one as well, taking a look back at all of the weird, wild playoff formats that the NLL has decided to go with, including the mini game. So leave your thoughts in the comments below on anything that we covered today, and I hope you enjoyed. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see more NLL content from the historical perspective like this, or up-to-date news and that. If you like the past, present, and the future of the NLL, this is the place to be. Once again, I am Colin Doyle, not the Colin Doyle, just a Colin Doyle with a lifelong passion for lacrosse, and I'll see you in the next one.